Well, I'm here with a very special guest. This is someone who people I here in Central Florida, we know him well. He's the Polk County Sheriff. We have Sheriff Grady Judd with us. How you doing?
I'm wonderful today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And you are someone that a lot of folks, my audience is national, so a lot of folks may have seen you on places like Fox News and things because you've been kind of a champion for law and order and law enforcement. So I thought it would be great to have you on in light of all the different events that are ever changing in our time.
Well, it's an honor for me to be with you today and to be a sheriff of Polk County. You know, being a servant of the people is really, really special to me. And when I can go to work every day and know that somebody's going to rest easier because of the work that my deputies and I are doing today, that makes it a great career. And a servant's heart is what I have for this community. So it's pretty awesome.
Now, I was looking a little bit before this interview. I wanted to know the history of the sheriff. It goes back a long ways. It goes back, what, 1,300 years I was looking at? That the
Oh, yeah,
office of the sheriff, right? The longest running non-military office still in our law system. Is that right?
absolutely. Started in Europe and we brought it to this country. And still, like, for example, in Florida, we're a constitutionally based law enforcement officer. We're the only law enforcement officer that's mandated by the Constitution of the state to enforce the various laws in the different counties. So it is a very powerful office from the authority perspective. And that's why it's important that when you elect a sheriff, you elect someone that knows how to use that authority and power of the government very judiciously and not somebody who is a loose cannon.
Yeah. Well, what's the difference between, for folks who are not familiar with, police commissioner or chief of police versus a sheriff, for folks who are unfamiliar?
Believe it or not, a lot of people think it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
The chief is in charge in the city and the sheriff's in charge of the county of providing law enforcement services. And there is a remarkable difference between your elected sheriff and your appointed chief. A chief is responsible for primary delivery of services and investigation of crime that occurs in the city. But your sheriff is like the umbrella. The sheriff is the only one that's mandated by Constitution, Florida Constitution in this state, to deliver law enforcement services. For example, any city in Polk County could meet next week and say, hey, we're going to do away with the police department and save some money. And they could do that. Well, the sheriff has to take over the duties and responsibilities. In fact, I have as much authority in downtown Lakeland or downtown Winter Haven or downtown any city. I have as much authority there as I do in the unincorporated area.
Huh.
And the sheriff, for example, is the senior, if you will, law enforcement executive or primary law enforcement executive in the county. To give you an example, I'm grateful for all of our police chiefs and our police departments. They're wonderful and they're professionals and they're my friends. But for example, you take any police officer, detective, he works up a burglary case and he goes down and obtains a burglary warrant against John Dellinger. Well, by law, once he obtains that warrant, he can pick John Dellinger up and hold him for the arrival of a deputy, or pick him up and deliver him to the county jail. But a city police officer can't serve a warrant.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't officially arrest you and
Huh.
put you in the court system at that point. It has to be an officer of the court, and the officer of the court is the sheriff. So we're grateful that our police officers do want to pick up their suspects after they work up a case and do hold them and join us on task force. But in the legal sense, once they obtain that arrest warrant, they can dust off their hands and go on to another case and say,
Mm-hmm.
Sheriff, go find them. They're your responsibility at that point in time.
I see.
In addition to that, the sheriff also does primary services in the unincorporated area, and I contract with, I believe it's 6 different towns in the county right now. In addition to that, I provide all the security for the courts, And it's the sheriff's obligation to carry out the order of the court. So I am the enforcement arm for all the judges. And in addition to that, I run animal control and I run the county jail for the Board of County Commissioners. The responsibility to run a county jail, the responsibility to run animal control by law is the Board of County Commissioners. But they have asked me, and I have agreed to run those two entities for them. And really, I wouldn't have it any other way. The deputies have always run the county jail for eons and eons, but there are some areas in the state and the nation where it's a different duty and responsibility. I would never agree to that. Because there's so much overlap of services and needs and interaction. So when you look at the sheriff and you look at the chief, even though the chief has some of the duties and responsibilities of sheriff, the reality of it is the sheriff is the overarching or the senior law enforcement officer of the county. In fact, somebody who lives in downtown Lakeland and pays city taxes, by the way, also pays county taxes. And they can pick the phone up and say, well, you know, those guys at the police department are nice guys, but I pay county taxes and I want to see a sheriff or a deputy. By law, we can't refuse them. So fortunately, we have this super great relationship between the sheriff's office and the different police agencies in this county. And it's because we have great police chiefs and professional law enforcement officers in the cities as well. And we just all work together as one big team.
Yeah. Well, I know it's an ongoing investigation, but I wanted to get your comment on that horrific murder of former City Commissioner Edie Yates and her husband there in downtown Lakeland. I know that the city has been investigating that, but just wanted to get your take. It was shocking for us in the community in Lakeland to see in that neighborhood. No one expected such a horrible, apparently kind of random murder. We don't even know what the motive was.
Well, first and foremost, the Lakeland Police Department did an excellent job. They brought that guy to justice very quickly, and it showed what kind of person that we were dealing with. He made no effort to cover his crime. I mean, when he had Edie write out and sign two $5,000 checks, and then he takes David's not only identification but credit cards, and then steals the car. You know, that's a trail that even Helen Keller can follow. But it still takes a lot of work to bring that case together professionally so it's prosecutable in court. And we all are fortunate when we get a break and a tip like Lakeland did. So they were able to get him in jail really quick, and they did a really complete and thorough and professional investigation. And I congratulate them for that work. We were here to assist and help if they needed it, but they had that well under control and didn't need any additional resources. But I've known Edie Yates since high school. And I can tell you that she's a brilliant lady and a kind lady and a wonderful lady. And she was Mrs. Lakeland, whether it was her civic duties and responsibilities, where she would not only be active civically, but you would more than likely find her as the president of the club or the vice president or on the board of directors. She was a leader. She was not only just a wonderful person, she was a leader in the community. So it broke my heart. And from the information that I have, and I may not have all the details of it because obviously we didn't work the investigation, but that's what it was. It was a random, you know, this guy is just a thug. He's just a criminal. He's a bad guy. We had arrested him and sent him to prison for about 3 years just recently for carrying a concealed firearm by a convicted felon. He's got a long history. Well, it's not rocket science for people to ride around the beautiful lakes, Lake Hollingsworth, Lake Morton, and see all these large houses. And you figure if there's a large house and nice cars in the garage, somebody probably has some assets. Well, they're not even smart enough to think, well, these people don't keep money at home. They keep it in a bank. But they broke in anyway. And that's what he did. He entered into that house and he accosted Edie, you know, and obviously stole jewelry, got those checks, viciously murdered her, and then did the same thing with David. And it breaks your heart. But here's the snapshot. The neighborhood is panicked, as they should be, and concerned, as they should be, because it's a random act of pure evil in the flesh. But that's happening to somebody, someplace in this county, across the state and nation every day. In some neighborhood, there is not necessarily a murder, but a horrific crime. People are being victimized. So what people are feeling around Lake Morton today is what we fight against, to keep it compartmentalized and to reduce it to all-time lows. And our goal is not only to make people safe with our law enforcement efforts, but to give an environment where they feel safe. And in Polk County, you can feel safe. Not only are you safe, but you can feel safe, even though we've seen a couple of horrific, radical actions out of the blue. And you go, well, Grady, how do you justify that? The crime rate in Polk County, unincorporated Polk County, and where we provide services, the data we have 1.4 crimes per 100 people per year. Okay, think about that. 1.4 crimes per 100 per year. When you look at Chicago, Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, Baltimore, they're averaging between 15 and 20 crimes per 100 per year. So they've got crime off the charts, and we've got crime underneath the charts. Our crime rate is at a 49-year low. We've never been so safe. But I do have to add one thing. I have talked about the prolific criminal. We should have a forgiving criminal justice system, and we do. Only about 4 people of every 100 that's charged criminally this year in Florida will go to prison for any period of time. There are diversions, there are probations, there are fines. In some cases, there's not substantial charges to move forward or evidence to move forward with. So when only 4 out of 100 ever goes to prison in the state of Florida, that's a forgiving criminal justice system. But do you know the reason this guy didn't have a 5 or 10 or 15-year sentence on his possession of a concealed firearm? Was because we have a forgiving system. He'd been in and out of the system over and over and over before. And there's always going to be evilness. But in spite of all of our forgiving system, we got people running around this country saying and being believed that, oh, we got to have criminal justice reform. Criminal justice reform. It's a bad criminal justice system. Well, all systems should always be improved. There should be constant improvement, constant change for the positive. But we don't have a bad criminal justice system when your crime is 1.4 crimes per 100 per year. When our crime rate was going like this until we got these get tough on crime laws, and now our crime rate is going like this. But for the last 30 years, crime has gone down because we sentence people to prison when they need it, and the prolific offender serves 85%, not 20 or 30%. But so we've got people wanting to do away with bail. That puts more criminals on the streets that shouldn't be there. Just show up at court. Well, they don't show up at court. And then they've got people saying, well, this low-level nonviolent crime, low-level nonviolent drug crime, or low-level nonviolent crime, we shouldn't lock them up. We're too hard on them. We ought to give them breaks. Yeah. Well, if you look back at the guy who murdered Edie Yates and her husband, he had low-level nonviolent crimes and arrest. If you look at the guy who, the overwhelming majority of all criminals that are in for violent, dangerous crimes, they have low-level nonviolent crimes in the past. You know the difference between a low-level nonviolent criminal and a violent criminal? A single act.
Yeah.
And so that's why I tell folks, improve the criminal justice system, afford more opportunities to learn skills while they're locked up and sober, give them every opportunity. But when you quit holding people accountable and responsible, they'll do what they do. And that's why you see what you see in Seattle and Portland and all that craziness that goes on in other places that we don't have here. So I tell people, you know, be smart, but don't quit holding people responsible and accountable. If you do, your crime rate goes up and your safety goes down. And these random acts of craziness, like happened to Edie, that's going to happen on very rare occasions. But she just happened to be the nice house that he walked into. It could have been any houses on Lake Morton or Lake Hollingsworth or any other nice neighborhood where they go, nice house, must have something.
And that was in the morning, wasn't it?
Early in the morning, like, 7 o'clock-ish.
And I know my family goes out to feed ducks. Can you just imagine being there at the wrong time?
Absolutely.
Some guys coming in could just.
Well, my hobby is photography, and I go to Lake Morton frequently to photograph different times of year. You have different.
Too bad you weren't there at that moment, huh?
I wish I was there at that moment because I would have had a gun.
Yeah.
And because I carry a camera and a gun. I shoot you with a camera or shoot you with a gun. But had I been there and seen that guy scurrying around to go in Edie's house that morning, I'd go, hey, that dude don't belong there. There would have been a confrontation before he ever got inside.
Right.
And if somebody caught him on the outside and said something to him, he'd have just walked on.
Right.
But that's not what happened. He got inside, he got the upper hand, and that's when he's dangerous. When they went to arrest him, he wasn't dangerous. He didn't fight the police. He didn't have a gun shootout. You see, most of those people are cowards unless they have the upper hand. And then when they do, they're violent, dangerous individuals.
So when you look at stories like that, have you been able to get an understanding for the root of this human evil? I saw this story that you were talking about in the news with the Angel Lobato and Jojo Lobato, and they murdered a young man, Danny Frazier. Is that right, Danny?
Yes.
Yeah, and that was here in Polk County, and the horrific nature of the description. You said this is pure evil, and the victim was fighting for his life. He was stabbed. He was beaten with a baseball bat, and it's sick.
Sure.
What is behind this level of evil? What's behind this human evil?
And here's another aberration. That is one of those crazy one-off events. These two kids, they were 18 and 19, and they were kids, even though they're adults. They'd never even been arrested. Now, I did talk to someone who worked in the school system and said they were mean little SOBs, and that they would torment people at school and be a discipline issue and be out of control. But they didn't even have a criminal history. And yet they go from that to the worst imaginable type crime and the worst imaginable type murder, because stabbing and beating is personal and up close. And they bragged about it, and they were smug with the detectives when we interviewed them. And they said it'd get them street cred, and they'd have stripes, and they'd be respected in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? They're going to be locked up in prison and seen as a bunch of young fools. But this is, at very best, to me, this is a classic death penalty case. But that's not my determination. That's Brian Haas's, and you can believe Brian Haas is an awesome state attorney. If he can put the evidence together, if it exists, he'll do his best to do a death penalty case. If he can't, he'll lock them up for the rest of their lives, because his team is just phenomenal under his leadership. But these kids did the most horrific crime. This Danny was just a nice young man. He's a kid to me because he's only 21, but he's just a nice kid. He worked hard, worked at Publix, did a good job, lived with his mom and and my heart breaks for Danny's family because that's just terrible. And but there are those aberrations in life. But don't think for a second they're not spooled up by social media and what's cool and glitzy. Those people, and they're not right in the head. You understand, people that murder people are not right in the head.
Yeah.
They go, oh, well, these got mental health issues. Well, no crap.
Mm-hmm.
Normal people don't kill people.
Mm-hmm.
They all got issues.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of it is they are such, I call them weak-minded, that when they watch this cool video and this cool stuff, or this run, fight, and shoot game or something, they superimpose that to be reality in their world and how cool and big they are. And that's what you got with those Lobato kids.
Wow.
So too bad for them. They're locked up forever, which is exactly where they should have been. And our heart breaks.
Yeah.
Our heart breaks for Danny's family.
When you see those kind of insane, violent evil, it reminds me of that show from the 90s. I don't know if you ever saw it, Twin Peaks. Remember that show on CBS? And the detective, it was an old 90s show about detectives looking for a murder case. And it basically goes into a spiritual dimension where these people were demonically possessed. In your encounters, I mean, I know it's kind of beyond probably what your normal range of detective tools are, but have you ever come face to face with true spiritual, malevolence when you're dealing with these cases up close?
Well, I don't know if you would classify it like that, but I'm a true believer and a Christian man and a God-fearing man. If you look back in the Bible, there's been pure evil from the beginning of time. Mm-hmm. Some people are just nasty, mean people. Mm-hmm. And it's not because their mama didn't, hug them enough. They're just mean people. And you go all back through history. That's not the majority of your criminals. The majority of your criminals are opportunists, or either they've become addicted to crime because of their environment where they don't want to obey the law, so they want to use drugs, they want to party all the time, and the next thing you know, they're addicted, and now they got to steal and do criminal conduct to support their habits. Yeah. But most of them are not evil people. They're opportunists, they're drug addicted, and they need money, so they steal stuff, but they're not confrontational. Mm-hmm. There's some people that get mad and overreact because of an anger management problem. That's not the problem. The real problem, and fortunately there's not many of them, is the Jeffrey Dahmers. There's the people that are sociopathic, that have no psychological, emotional stability. And fortunately, there's not many of them, and they are very violent and very dangerous. That's why one of the reasons I tell everybody, look, unless you're absolutely fearful of a firearm, obtain one, learn how to shoot it. Heck, it's kind of fun to go to the range and shoot, be proficient, and carry it. And if you bump into that one, maybe hopefully none in a lifetime, but one in a lifetime horrible event like Edie found herself in, and she had a gun on the bedstead when that guy came through the door of the bedroom, she'd have been able to pick that up and start laying lead into him, it would have modified his behavior immediately. Mm-hmm. And it would have pleased our soul to have found him dead in her bedroom rather than finding her dead in her bedroom.
Well, what do you think about, on that note, this, if Biden and Harris are going to be the president here, it looks like, what do you think is going to happen with their attempts? They have their guy, can't even think of his name right offhand. The guy said, oh yeah, heck yes, we're going to take your guns, or what was his name? The guy from, not Pete Buttigieg, the other guy, but they keep talking about, oh, we'll pass a law. And if they pick up the Senate seat, then they'll have the Senate where they can push a lot of radical legislation, ban AR-15s. And I tell people, just because you make a band doesn't make, what is it, 10 to 15 million AR-15s just poof into thin air. They're going to go on the black market. They're going to go where there's money. Their gangs are going to sell them to crazies, just like you're talking about. So what do you do as a sheriff? Is there anything you can do to protect, since you're the constitutional safeguard?
Sure.
What
Well,
can you
first
do?
and foremost, we have a Second Amendment right to possess firearms, and that's been codified and solidified by the Supreme Court just recently in the last few years. So, guns aren't going away. Okay, first and foremost. Yeah, there's going to be the radicals, the far left socialists that want to push for that, because the first thing you do to create a communistic, socialistic society is get control of the people. It's hard to get control of the people if they've all got guns. So there's going to be that element. I don't believe that is the traditional Democratic Party. I don't think a majority of the Democrats think that way. There are some that do. I think because there's still a lot of conservative and moderate Democrats in this country. So when you look at that, you've got to be alert and aware and ready to push back. But quite frankly, no one is going to unilaterally pass a law in this state or nation against the Constitution, the Second Amendment, and say, Sheriff, go pick up the guns. I'm not picking up the guns, clearly. If you are a law-abiding citizen and not a convicted felon, you have a right to your firearm based on the fact that you've not been dealt mentally incompetent. But that's just not going to happen. I'm going to protect the people's rights to own firearms. I always have and always will. So there's always some that want to try to change that. That's not the critical mass, and I don't foresee that in the near future. If a few socialist and communist and way left-leaning people had their way, sure, that would happen. But they would destroy our Constitution as we know it. But we all have to be vigilant every day and understand there's incrementalism.
Right.
They won't be able to go poof and do that. But you got to see what's that one little thing that they want. And if you give in, it's just a building block. Right. So be careful of incrementalism, because that's what we've got to fight against. And we need to always protect people's rights to their Second Amendment. Oh, the First Amendment. Oh, to all the amendments.
Right. You've been seeing all the reports. The president has issued some warnings about the voting systems. There's different companies, software that I guess has some foreign ties to other countries. Does the sheriff have any role in protecting, the county from foreign tampering with votes? I mean, this is just allegations at this point, but they've been made by the highest office in the land, by the president and Sidney Powell, his attorney, and others. And I guess we don't know all the facts yet, but just assuming that these things have some possibility, does the sheriff have any role or ability to protect or, vouchsafe the votes and the integrity of the votes?
Well, first off, the supervisor of elections, Lori Edwards in our county, who is also a constitutional officer, she took a sworn oath to uphold and make sure that we have fair and honest elections. Mm-hmm. And Lori Edwards will absolutely unequivocally do that. While people were trying these silly computer systems without paper, Lori never went there. Mm-hmm. So we have every vote that was cast on paper, and she made sure that they were in the office according to law by close of business on election day. That should have happened all over the nation. And certainly I believe that there has always been some fraud. There always will be a small amount. Oh, you got 100, you got 1,000. Well, on a statewide vote, it's never meant anything. But it means something now. Every vote counts. So where they used to just dismiss the fact that 100 people that were dead voted, they dismissed it because, hey, the guy won by 250,000 or 1 million votes. So what's 100? Now, when every vote counts, we're seeing the fraud that's probably been there in minor amounts exaggerated. I don't know what's true, and I don't know what's not true. There's allegations flying all over. There seems to be some consistency that this software company had some glitches in their software. And if they have paper copies of the elections and the ballots to back them up, they need to do a hand recount. Let's get it right. I can tell you, I'm a conservative, but I want a fair election. That is the ground. That is the very ground start of everything that this country is about. And whether the Democrat wins, whether the Republican wins, no matter who wins, it's got to be based upon an honest, ethical election where we count every legal vote. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm always suspicious when we have a group of people that go, well, you need to have a photo ID to have a driver's license. You need to have a photo ID to go to the doctor. You need a photo ID to get a credit card. But by the way, you don't need to have a photo ID to get a voting card. What? There doesn't need to be a background check to make sure you're not a felon. What? What you're telling me is we want to create an environment that's ripe for fraud. And that's what happens when people don't have to. You have to be able to say who you are to get food stamps. Mm-hmm. Or to get the EBT card now. You have to identify who you are. But yet we want people to be able to get a voting card that we can't even verify their identity. That tells you people are screaming, and we want to create an environment for fraud, an environment for fraud. So at the end of the day, there's none of us that are honest, law-abiding Americans that don't want a fair election. And if the Democrats work harder and they get the most votes and they win, that's the government we'll go with. And then we'll debate back and forth, and they should meet someplace in the middle for legislation. If the Republicans win, then you need to debate back and forth, meet in the middle, and that's the government we'll go with. What we've got now with this polarized, where we've all marched to the far end of the right and the far end of the left, doesn't do anyone any good. And statistically speaking, this entire country is center left or center right. That 10% on each end of the fringe, I call it a bell curve. All of the public's on a bell curve. 80% of us are center right, center left, and can meet, discuss, and come to reasonable legal ways to make this country work and be very productive. But we got to quit listening to that socialistic left and that radical right that want to destroy our form of government. Mm-hmm. We've got to quit listening to them. We've got to marginalize them and go, you're radical and you're crazy, whether you're far left or far right. And the 80% of us in the middle of this bell curve have got to take control and say, we want it moderately right or we want it moderately left. And that's okay. But we're not going to be fanatically left and we're not going to be fanatically right.
Yeah. I want to close with a question. I want to know what, led you to want to be a sheriff. When you were a little kid, did you want to be a sheriff? Did you have a dream of being a sheriff? And was there an inciting incident that happened in your life that led you to that choice and that goal?
Yeah, it's a God thing. I truly believe God wanted my mission field on this earth to be to serve people, because from the time I was a little bitty guy, and when I say little bitty, I'm talking 4, 5, 6 years old, all I wanted to be was a policeman and the sheriff. And in fact, Mom's got some old Super 8 video that you probably saw in my first campaign, and I still have it today, of me with a little policeman's uniform on. And there was a punching bag who was a bad guy that I was beating up and taking him to jail. Well, we try to take him to jail kinder and gentler than first punching him like a punching bag. But back from the time I was a child, and I never changed my mind. I never changed my focus or my direction. I married my high school sweetheart, who, by the way, she's still with me. She hadn't run me off yet. But I looked her in the eye, and one of her one of the things that she had to reason out in her mind was, and I told her, look, I'm going to be in law enforcement. It's a dangerous job, but that's what I want to do. It's what I've always wanted to do. You've got to be able to live with that uncertainty of whether I'm coming home at night. You've got to live with the uncertainty that I'm going to work night shift, and sometimes all the time and sometimes round the clock. You've got to live with the uncertainty, or maybe the certainty that sometimes the community is going to be put ahead of our family, because during times of emergency, people need help. And that's what law enforcement officers do. And she agreed to those circumstances. If she'd have looked me in the eye as much as I loved her and said, hey, I love you, I want to be married to you, but you can't be a cop, I wouldn't have been married to her today, because I never left my vision of being in law enforcement. And my dream was always to be the sheriff. And when in 2004, my sheriff, Sheriff Crow, the last of 5 that I worked for, retired, I ran for office and I asked the people if I could serve them as their sheriff, and they allowed it. And they just reelected me without opposition for my 5th term. I am the first sheriff in the history of Polk County that has been elected to 5 terms of office. Sheriff Crow had 4.5 terms. He was appointed, but I am the first sheriff to be elected to 5 terms of office. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to serve people. I love this community. I love the people. I love protecting the good people from the evil people. And my deputies are simply the very best. But we coach and teach. Look out for the best interests of the community. Help the community. Make sure the community has help and resources and food in their cabinets. We're not just law enforcement officers. We're protectors of the community. And that's why we've been successful here.
Is it what you expected it to be?
It's more than I ever expected it to be. I live a dream every day. I live a dream every day. And my goodness, I just thank the good Lord every day when I get up for the opportunity to be the sheriff and to help people in the community. And then when I go to bed at night, I ask forgiveness for everything I screwed up today.
Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on the program.
Well, I look forward to talking to you again someday. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving and a very Merry Christmas.
Very good. Thanks again.
See you later.